All right, welcome to the Athletic Foundation Workshop Series. Today, we are welcoming back Roger Kitchen Jr. with Power Mental Performance. He is going to help us as parents and coaches learn how we can best support our student athletes when it comes to mental performance mastery and the mental game. Roger, take it away.
All right, so let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to share my screen. I've got some slides I want to walk you through, tell you a little bit about who I am, what I do, how I work with teams, and then start talking about how parents can be a part of this process. So hopefully at the end of the session, you're going to feel maybe a little bit like a mental skills coach yourself as you work with your student athlete, regardless of the sport, um, male or female. Gender isn't relevant in terms of, hey, how can I help my student athlete really perform at their best, and what role do I play as a parent in that journey for them? So let's go ahead and share the screen, and just give me a thumbs up, DJ, if you see it. All right. All right. So let me just move a few things around and we will. All right. So what I do, Roger, what do you do? So I work one on one with coaches and teams, athletes, and parents. So when most teams that you've worked with, they got a head coach, an assistant coach, they've got a position coach, skill coach, strength and conditioning. Different coaches play different roles for different teams. I'm no different, where I tell people, if you want to get bigger, faster, stronger, you can put your hand on a barbell, you can go out to the track, you can go to the court. In terms of developing athletes, I like to say I work on their mental strength. So I'm working in their mental space, helping them get stronger mentally and emotionally in order to perform under pressure, manage the anxiety of pregame, nervousness. How do they respond to adversity in the midst of a game, even practice? And sometimes seasons can be really long. A lot of things that can challenge an athlete. So I'm really embedded with the coaching staff and a team, and I work one-on-one with, again, the coaches, the teams, talk with parents, and I do one-on-one coaching with athletes. So I have a team focus, and then I do take on clients, and I'll do one-on-one sessions with athletes. When parents reach out to me, coaches reach out to me, and they'll describe different situations that maybe their athletes are going through, and they feel like having a one-on-one mental skills coach would be really beneficial for them. So just a little bit about what I do. And here's kind of the background on power mental performance. So at the end of the day, my why is I want athletes, all athletes, regardless of it's high school, college, professional, I want them to just be mentally and emotionally well, just to get to the place where they feel okay. Because, as concerned parents, coaches, you just want them to perform well and you want them to reach their goals athletically. So I use mental tools, I use techniques, do different workshops and sessions to help train the coaches, athletes, parents, teams, because we want them to achieve their goals, and they all have this internal need to deliver exceptional results while dealing with pressure. So I'm really preparing their mind for high performance. So that's power mental performance, why I do what I do, and kind of the what I do. So this is my thing. I think the bottom line on all of this is that when coaches and teams and parents perform at their best mentally and emotionally, it creates a really healthy environment for those athletes to perform at their best, regardless of the pressure, even the situation. And so really, I work really hard to make sure coaches and teams are really providing the right environment for that to happen. So I talk a lot to coaches about culture, and that's even relevant to the family, right? So what kind of family environment do we have within the home? Some home environments are really strong, others struggle. And so, helping provide that right environment even within the home for parents is really important to help their athlete perform at their best. So some of the teams that I've worked with and athletes, you may, if you're from Alabama, you may recognize some of the athletes. Jameis Winston is from Bessemer area, now plays for the Saints. He typically comes back every summer and has a 1 week camp last one he did was 2 or 3 years ago at Miles College, free to 100 student athletes to come and go through his football camp. So I was the mental skills coach for his camp, his dream camp. And then OJ Howard, who's from Lower Alabama, went on to play at Alabama and now with the Buccaneers. He has a camp and worked his camp as well. And then the other picture you see is I do workshops in the community. Again, helping people understand how they're wired mentally and emotionally and how that plays into them performing at their best. And so, I do these things with teams and athletes. So I work with high schools, I work with colleges, and all sports. There's different, I haven't touched a sport, touched almost all sports. So swimming and diving, all the way to the big three: baseball, basketball, football, and really trying to help our student athletes perform at their best. So what's the impact? What's the so what of a mental skills coach working with a team? We want those athletes to perform under, increase self-confidence first, improve focus, achieve their goals, perform under pressure, developing the mental toughness they're going to need, and then helping them, teaching them how to create a positive team culture. The higher your student athlete progresses in their career, from high school to college, college to professional, if they go that route, that performing under pressure and the mental toughness is what's going to separate them far above any of their talent. Many times we find the more mentally tough, the more resilient, how these student athletes respond to adversity, their competitive nature, that many times separates them from truly talented people. I've talked to minor league baseball players, professional hockey players that said, in the minor leagues in baseball, everybody's pretty much the same talent-wise. It's, what's going on here inside their head that helps them get to the next level. One former professional hockey player that lives in my area of Huntsville, he said, "Roger, I wish I had you when I played hockey, because I just struggled with different things, and it would have helped having a mental skills coach. It would have lengthened my career." Because again, the mental aspect of your sport really determines your success. I talk to athletes and I say, what percentage of your sport is mental? And just kind of pause for a second and think in your mind, what would that number be? And so most athletes will tell you 80 to 90% of my sport is mental. But when you look at their schedules during the week and the amount of hours that they devote to strength and conditioning, skill development, nutrition, sleep, academics, anything else, physical therapy, rehab, you add up the hours and then you say, how many hours do you dedicate to mental training, mental skill development? I mean, almost that number comes back 0 to 1, maybe 2 hours. And so, coaches now, when you look at the elite Division I programs in the country, regardless of the sport, they have mental skills coaches, they have sports psychologists. At the professional level, same thing. They're using sports psychologists, they're using mental skills coaches. The NBA Players Association 2 years ago passed a resolution that every NBA team has to have 2 clinical psychologists on their staff helping with mental performance and just anything related to stress, anxiety, and mental health issues for those NBA teams. So it's really taking off now in professional sports. So what I want to do now is kind of walk you through what a program would look like at a particular school. I work with a lot of high schools in my area, and a typical program looks something like this: 10 sessions, generally an hour long. And I basically come in and talk about different aspects of mental performance. We talk about the zone. Anybody who's an athlete has at some time probably felt they were in the zone, whether you're a runner, basketball player, baseball player, tennis, golf, they were in the zone. And what is the zone and what isn't it? How do we control those controllables? How do we have a process mindset versus always obsessing about results, i.e. wins and losses, statistics? Teaching them how to visualize, teaching them how to breathe properly, mindfulness techniques, how to manage their emotions, how to set goals. So a lot of the things that you see here, I teach teams. Not only is it super important for athletic performance, but these are life skills. Once they graduate from high school, college, and they go and either onto professional sports, they start raising families, they start working a job and have a career. You'll be amazed at how much of this rolls into their life, where they learn how to manage the stress, anxiety, and perform under pressure that comes with just living life. So one of the things I always tell coaches, and this is really relevant for parents, because this was a struggle I had too. Um, I have boys, really young men now. One is a high school senior, and he's a runner, cross country, indoor, outdoor track. My oldest son, who's now in college, he played basketball in high school, and actually now is getting into powerlifting, which is near and dear to my heart because that's my athletic background. I'm a powerlifter. And so one of the mistakes I made as a parent was always trying to own my son's motivation. And parents are well intentioned. We are well intentioned. We may text them inspirational quotes. We may stay on them to practice and do a lot of different things in order for them to become better at their particular sport. But the one thing we can't own for them is their motivation. They themselves are going to have to own that motivation. And one of the hardest things for parents is to step back and let that student athlete own their motivation. A friend of mine who's a sports psychologist, I was just in knots one day, venting to him, crying on his shoulder about one of my boys, and they just weren't doing what they needed to do. They wanted to go to college and get a scholarship and get that, play that particular sport, but the work ethic just wasn't there. And he just said, Roger, you're going to have to let them own their motivation. You can't own their motivation. So regardless of what happens, you have to let them own their motivation. And Andrew Carnegie said it so well. You can't push anyone up the ladder unless he or she is willing to climb a little. And so, learning how to pull back. And if that student athlete makes the mistake, they kind of have to bear the consequences of that in order to get better. And it's a process. It's such a process. And, in junior high, high school, and college, they're still kind of young, and they're learning and they're growing and developing. So I also work with teams on team culture. And so learning how to build team culture, what are the behaviors and aspects of a healthy team culture? Because we know when the locker room is good, everything else is good. And so when I go in and I talk to coaches, I spend a lot of time trying to unpack what's the culture like here? What's your coaching philosophy? Who influenced you? What is your process by which you develop a healthy locker room? And so coaching coaches on how to develop a healthy locker room is really important to me, because good team culture can overcome a lot of weaknesses in a team and even challenges. And so if you've heard of PJ Fleck, University of Minnesota football coach, he's a great culture builder. His row the boat mentality and his mantra at the University of Minnesota. And then James Franklin's a good culture builder at Penn State, Pete Carroll at the Seattle Seahawks, and really learning how to bring those best practices into a team environment to help those coaches. Now, flip that and think about what our culture is like, and even in our own homes. And so what are we doing to build a healthy culture within our homes? Again, it's very challenging depending on what school kids go to, how they were raised. There's some very difficult situations that occur in a lot of homes across the United States, and the culture isn't good. But teaching parents who are willing, how can I develop the right culture in my house so that my student athlete can perform at their highest ability? It's really important to me, and I work with parents and coaches on that. One of the things I teach all teams is what I call my 10 keys to achieving greatness. And so really this is about how like passion and calling and a love or a like for a sport impacts your motivation, which in then turn impacts you wanting to achieve something great or achieving a goal. And so as you see on the model, there's certain keys that are common to achieving greatness, things that always have to be there, like practicing, being smart, being focused, disciplined, working hard. Those things are non-negotiable. They always have to be there for somebody to achieve something great. Doesn't matter if you're a single mom, You're a business person, you're a plumber, you're an engineer, you are, a business leader, a head coach, fill in the blank with whatever occupation or where you're at in life. If you want to do something significant, these things need to be there. And then I have what's called uncommon keys, things that aren't really talked about a lot, but I still think make the process better. Um, so one of them is be humble. Now, can you achieve greatness and be arrogant jerk? Absolutely. But do you want to be remembered that way? No, you don't. I mean, none of us do. Humility goes a long way. Learning how to have fun and find joy in the process of achieving a goal or achieving something significant. That's important. Can you be miserable and achieve a goal? Yes, but you're probably not going to like yourself in the process. And it's going to be so unmotivating, but we will ourselves many times to get there. But so these are just kind of the uncommon common keys that I teach every team, because here's the most important part. These require zero talent. And so for a student athlete to learn these, and even for us as adults, I don't have to be super talented to do any of this. It's a matter of what I love, what I feel called to do, what I'm passionate about, because that gives me the motivation to achieve a goal or achieve something great. And then here's kind of the roadmap to get there. And so this is something I talk about with every single team, because at the end of the day, it doesn't require talent. It's just your passion, and then the discipline and the willingness, to lean in and go there. So when I talk about the zone, this is just another concept of teaching kids to control their controllables, teaching them to have a process mindset. So the blue and the green are good, and the red is bad. A lot of times I find athletes and even students, when they focus so much on what they can't control, it messes them up. They start having a lot of negative emotions, stress, anxiety, worry, fear, anger. They're not good. And then the results mindset, having so much emotional energy around, did we win or lose? How many points did I score? How fast did I run? What was my ACT score? What's my GPA? Um, you know, Teaching athletes and even just students in general to focus on what they can control and develop a process that's daily and weekly to accomplish their goals, and then learn to manage, if not ignore, what you can control, and don't worry about the results. Many times when the athlete puts a good plan in place to accomplish that goal and have daily and weekly goals, the results kind of take care of themselves. Nick Saban at the University of Alabama popularized the phrase the process, because he doesn't focus on wins or losses. He wants you to win every 60 seconds. It's a one play at a time mentality. Go win the play, hit the reset button, go win the next play again. And if you just win, in a football game every 60 seconds, every down at a time, usually the results come out in your favor. So this is just another concept that I teach athletes that's really relevant, not only in life, but for them as an athlete and a team. So one thing that I would love to say I developed, but I didn't, this actually came out of the basketball world. A gentleman by the name of George Mumford, who wrote the book, The Mindful Athlete. He was Michael Jordan's mental skills coach when he was with the Bulls, and Kobe Bryant's with the Lakers. And then another mental skills coach who worked in the NBA, a guy named Graham Betchart. They came up with this MVP process. This takes 5 to 10 minutes a day. And it's learning mindfulness practices, learning how to breathe, learning how to focus and stay in the moment, learning how to visualize your success, learning how to see your success, so that when you get into that situation, regardless of the sport, you feel like you've been there and it manifests itself. And then learning how to talk to yourself in a healthy way. So the positive self-talk. And so this is a concept I teach teams and athletes, and it's the MVP process. As adults, we can do this too, regardless of where we're at in life, regardless of where we work, even if we still compete as an adult. But that MVP process is really important for mental performance, and it's very simple, and it's something that can be done daily. Do it in the morning when you wake up, do it at night before you go to bed. You kind of pick what you want to do and when to do it. Another concept that's really important for athletes is this idea of the neutral zone. Trevor Moawad really popularized this in his book, It Takes What It Takes. And the idea is if something happens and you go negative, so think about the wide receiver that drops the game winning catch in the end zone. Think about the basketball player that misses the free throws that could win the game. Think about the runner that didn't get the time that they wanted to get the gold medal or didn't even qualify. There's lots of different scenarios in athletics where something negative happens and then I've got a choice how I respond to it. A lot of times when something negative happens to an athlete, the first thing we want to say is snap out of it, get over it. You need to, get positive. And that's just not mentally and emotionally, our brain isn't wired like that. We just can't go from like sad to happy in a second. We can't go from feeling like we just blew it and ruined the game to like being just, oh, this is great. So we talk about something neutral. So you want to get an athlete from being negative to just neutral. And what we mean by that is they really don't have, they're not too low emotionally. They're not too high emotionally. They're in the middle, and it's a place where it's like, I'm okay. And for a lot of athletes, if I'm just okay and I'm not having a lot of emotion either way, high or low, what I call being emotionally hijacked, then I'm good. And then from there, the idea is I just want to do the next right thing. So what is it that I need to do in this moment that is the next right thing? And so once that happens, then I can get to a place where I can recover from that mistake and move on and get in a better mental and emotional place. But for your athletes, when that mistake happens, that critical, it could even happen in a critical moment in a game or a competition, just getting them to neutral is the gold, and not getting them to feel great. And so how do we do that? I teach athletes how to do that, how to stay in that neutral zone, because that neutral zone is really the sweet spot for performance. You're not assigning any judgment, intent. You really are just emotionally level and able to perform and think in the moment and let all that muscle memory come through, that all that practice that's been done, all the repetitions and all the practices, that if I'm neutral, all that stuff comes through and I just don't think about it. It's just very natural for me. So now I want to talk about kind of the issues and challenges we're seeing in high school sports and youth sports right now, because this is important as we think about, so people that watch this and maybe on the call, our kids probably did some youth sports. Maybe they played sports in junior high. Maybe they play in high school. They want to go on to college and play professional sports. But what we're seeing in youth sports at an alarming rate is them leaving their sport, what we consider the big four. Typically we talk big three, but the big four: baseball, basketball, football, and soccer. So soccer is now kind of considered, part of the big four. And we're seeing youth leave these sports at a particularly young age. And so several factors impact this. So the older they get and the more they progress in terms of grades and moving up, through school, many times there's cuts that eventually come in. So not every sport carries athletes. So there's kind of an up or out mentality. If you think about AAU and travel teams, it's very expensive. Even just to play on a high school team, particularly football comes to mind, can be very expensive. So some families just financially can't do it. Again, a hyper selection process. It is very, very competitive. And sometimes, depending on the sport, only the very best play. And a lot of research has stated a lot of kids, a lot of youth just said it's just not fun anymore. But you think about it, if it starts getting competitive, if there's some financial considerations that are there, if it is, a tryout environment where they have to try out to make a team, then a lot of that fun starts to kind of, it's not just kind of hanging out with my friends and playing the sport anymore. Now it's, funneling a certain percentage of kids into that sport, and not everybody makes it. And then we are finding a lot of inexperienced coaches. They don't manage their emotions well. They may have a low IQ for that particular sport. They may not be a good administrator or an organizer of that particular team. And so there's different deficiencies within a coach that can lead to, youth having just a negative experience. Teenagers, teenage players quit really primarily due to poor coaching or lack of playing time, over practicing, and that leads to injury. So, there are preventable injuries, the time demands, pressures from parents. And so there's just a lot going on as they start to get older, that even teenagers, now that we're talking junior high, senior high, they're just starting to withdraw and leave certain sports, especially the big four, for a lot of different reasons. And now parents are playing a role in that as well. Interesting statistic here. Lacrosse is now the fastest growing high school sport, and it has been trending for years. And there's a gentleman by the name of Dave Phillips. He runs the Titleist Golf Performance Institute, and he did some research on why this is happening. He saw a lot with his golfers, but he noticed it across the big four. And one of the things, let's see if it's the next bullet. Nope. One of the things that Dave Phillips noticed and started doing research, there was one contributing, the main contributor, shouldn't say one, the main contributor for athletes leaving their high school sport and then going over to lacrosse was the car ride home. Think about that for a minute. And look, I'm guilty. And on the next slide, I'm going to confess my sins to the group and tell you what I did wrong, in order to help you become better as a mental skills parent for your student athlete. But the car ride home was one of the biggest triggers, because if you're in the big four, mom and dad probably played that sport as a big four, or felt like they had a lot of knowledge that they needed to share with their son or daughter in terms of their performance on the ride home from school. Now, as they get older, get a license, and they don't have that car ride home dynamic. But then when that student athlete gets home, parents were really notorious for coaching their kids right after a game in that car ride home, what they did wrong, what they needed to do, and just really started making that experience miserable. And so, even if there wasn't a car ride home, when that student athlete did get home, it was very much the parents coaching that athlete, what they needed to do, how they needed to improve. And so what ended up happening is students were just quitting the big four and they were going to lacrosse. And here's the main reason. Have you or I ever played lacrosse? Think about it. I never played lacrosse. We played it in high school as a PE class, and I think I had it as a PE class in college. I don't know anything about lacrosse. And that's basically what happened. Mom and dad were now watching their student athlete play lacrosse in high school, and they're like, you're doing a great job, because they don't understand the sport. And they don't know all the nuances and everything that goes into being a phenomenal lacrosse player. And so next slide is going to be tips and techniques on how to handle these kind of different situations so that you can support your student athlete and give them a good experience. So I made all the mistakes with great intentions. And so I want to help you avoid some of those things that I made, and hopefully you'll have a better experience. So one of the things that I always recommend, and this came from Dave Phillips too at the Titleist Golf Institute, don't talk about the game for 24 hours. Let your student eat, let them grab a shower and decompress. Now, I did have one parent come back to me and they're like, well, what if your student wants to talk to you about the game? And that's fine. And I said, avoid in those conversations coaching them. Just ask questions, ask open-ended questions, not yes or no questions, and let them do the talking and you do the listening. And here's the thing, avoid the temptation to ask leading questions, getting them to the point you want to make. We don't want to do that. So just how do you think you did tonight? What was the feedback the coach gave you? Did you get any, feedback? I use the word feedback. Teenagers don't use that, but what did some of the other players say? Um, and a lot of time, once I got past coaching my one son in the car ride home and making that a miserable experience for he and I, on the way home, we would talk about movies. Marvel, they love comic books. So we talk about DC comics and Marvel movies and everything else but the game. And so, but, try your best really not to talk about the game for 24 hours. Let them decompress, and if they do want to go there, just ask questions and let them lead the conversation. Easier said than done. I understand that. Again, the car ride home was the big trigger for quitting. Try to talk about something else. um, Talk to your student athlete about what you can do differently. So here's what I mean by that. My youngest son was a runner, and in junior high, I remember just particular one meet, he didn't do well. And my youngest son is very hard on himself. So any mistake, he beats himself up. So he just didn't have a good 800-meter run. And he went up in the stands and he was just moping and pouting and he was just angry. And a lot of his friends came over and tried to encourage him. And he was just rude to them. He just wouldn't talk to them. He didn't want to say anything to them. And like I took him underneath the stadium bleachers and I just coached him hard. And said that's just unacceptable behavior, but it didn't do any good in that moment. And so after a day or two, I just went back to him, and because I felt kind of this big. It's one of those conversations when you blow it with your student athlete and you knew you blew it, and as a parent you feel this big. I said, what do you want me to do differently in that situation? How do you want me to handle that? He's like, Dad, just leave me alone. He's like, I'll get over it. He's like, I just need time to just like get it out of my system and vent. And so from there on, I watched him do it multiple times. He didn't run a certain event well, and I could just see him. He was just angry and mad as soon as he came over the finish line. And I just let him go. And within about 30 minutes, he was good. And then he just moved on to the next event. And so it's funny that the different client athletes that I've had, and I've worked with them one-on-one, it's not uncommon for me to end up coaching the parent too without them realize I'm coaching them, because I see the dynamic. They put so much pressure on their student athlete to perform. And, I had a conversation with one father I remember we were just texting back and forth for a while one evening. And he got to the same place I did. He goes, you know what? After talking with you, I feel this big. And he went and talked to his son and asked his son, what do you want me to do differently? And the son said, quit sending me motivational texts. Quit trying to encourage me. Quit trying to do all these motivational things. Just give me my space. I'll be fine. And so like he apologized to his son. He and his son had a good come to Jesus meeting and they were fine. And then from there, the dynamic changed and his son's performance changed. He no longer felt the pressure to perform, from his parent. Because quite frankly, the coaches put so much pressure on the kids anyway, they don't need it from us. So that's just an example of something you can do. Again, I often spend time coaching more parents, sometimes more than I do athletes. Here's another thing is, from a parent who watches, so I've been an assistant coach with high school track and field and cross country. I've also been the parent on the sideline and just watch, from afar. And, when I talk to coaches, the biggest challenge they have is parents. And I get that. Parents want to tell coaches how to do things. And I tell parents, I said, as hard as it is, as difficult as it is, let the coaches coach. The only situation where we would get involved is if the coach is doing something immoral, unethical, if the coach is doing something along those lines, where we would have to go and talk to that particular coach. And so many times when my kids came home and they were just complaining about the coaches, what they were doing wrong, and just not having a good experience, they almost would look at me like, Dad, go fix it. And I'm like, I'm not fixing it. I may not agree with how certain coaches do certain things, but I want to teach you how to communicate with your coach so that you can go in and have a conversation with that coach and sit down with that coach and really have and resolve your problem. And that's hard. And it takes intentionality uh, to teach your student athlete how to have a healthy conversation with the coach. And so I don't think I ever had a conversation with a coach. And one of the things I told my sons, I said, if you don't talk it out, you're going to act it out. So think about that statement. If you don't talk it out, you will act it out. And I'd watch them get angry and frustrated and stressed out. And I said, if you don't talk it out with the coach, it's going to manifest itself in a bad way on that team and create, the wrong kind of environment for the other athletes. And so, look, there's all kinds of books out there that we as parents can read. Crucial Conversations, Difficult Conversations. There's another one called Verbal Judo that teaches us as adults how to have a difficult conversation. But we can take those tips and techniques and teach our kids just 2 or 3 simple things that they can go into that coach's office, sit down, and have a conversation with that coach. And what I have found is when my boys would go do that, it made the situation better. It didn't make it great. It was just okay, but at least they were keeping the communication lines open. So we have to teach, and look, that's a life skill. So as we get to be adults and we go out into the world, if they ever manage people or they work on a team, think about it. If you're married, I mean, look, learning how to have a healthy, crucial conversation with friends, family, coworkers, it's just a life skill. And so we need to teach our kids how to do that. Biggest thing is don't complain. It's easy for parents to, and I would teach, I'd teach this with athletes too. Don't complain. It develops cliques. It can create a bad environment for coaches. It can create a bad environment for the team. And the one thing as a parent, we don't want to complain about a team or coach in front of the student athlete, because then it only makes the situation worse. Learn how to really moderate that and really don't bring that negativity into that environment. So, probably most of your student athletes haven't had the benefit of working with a mental skills coach. For the teams that I work with, I do a parents workshop similar to this, and I show them exactly what, I teach their student athletes, their boys and their girls. And what I tell them is reinforce, here's what I teach, reinforce it at home. Something as simple as, if your, son or daughter come home and maybe they're just complaining about something, it's like, teaching them how, to kind of look through the lens and say, can you control that? Is that an uncontrollable? And then redirect them to focusing on what can you control in the situation, and that's what you need to do. Are they getting too hyper focused on a result, wins and losses statistics? Teaching them how to set goals daily and weekly and stick to the process. Maybe it's, something around mindfulness or breathing or visualization, learning how to stay neutral. So what I tell the parents is just continue to reinforce what we're already teaching them. And that way they can have those conversations with their son or daughter in the home. And again, your student athlete owns their motivation, not you. And that's a challenge for a lot of parents because we want the best. We're well intentioned. Our intentions are good. We want them to have the discipline and the work ethic and all those intangibles that don't require talent in order for them to achieve their goals. And so let the student own the motivation, really learn to back off. And that's hard because they may make mistakes, but that's a process they're going to have to go through.